Well, welcome. It's wonderful to be the moderator for the Mid-America Conference on History session dealing with the Kennedy assassination with really four of the leading lights who have been trying to get us to understand what is the biggest murder mystery in U.S. history. It's fitting that we're here with, and the founder of this conference, James Giglio, has written the seminal book that we use in colleges on the presidency of John F. Kennedy, part of the University of Kansas Press's series on the presidency, and it's a book he constantly updates. So James, thank you for doing that. And I also might add, this is very timely. Unlike a lot of history topics, I don't have to explain to you what the Kennedy assassination was, nor probably do I have to remind you, but I will, that we are rapidly coming upon the 50th anniversary of the Kennedy assassination in November of 2013. I suspect you're going to be seeing a lot of talk about 50 years later because, like Pearl Harbor or 9/11, it's one of those moments that anybody alive that's still alive today that was alive in 63 has it's the moment they heard about the news, and people have stories, and it's endlessly fascinating. Already books are coming out this November by popular television host and a scholar dealing with the Kennedy assassination. I think we'll find more and more. So we're very lucky to have these scholars here today. The protocol we're going to do is I'm going to call them up one at a time according to the program order. They're going to have about 15 to 20 minutes max to talk. Then after all four have their say, I'm going to go back in the same order and allow each gentleman 20 minutes. 10 minutes. And at that point, I might ask a couple of questions, and then we'd like to open it up to Q&A from the audience. We have, as you can tell from the program, 2-hour session here, so we should be able to get at some of the questions. All of us wonder what happened. All of us are fascinated about the Warren Commission and Lee Harvey Oswald, Jack Ruby. I, in a previous talk today, spoke on Walter Cronkite and how people absorbed the assassination via television. There are just hundreds of thousands of different ways to look at this tragic event. And let's begin. I'm going to call up Gerald McKnight of Hood College. He's author of Breach of Trust: How the Warren Commission Failed the Nation and Why. And this is an ongoing inquiry for him. He's working on a manuscript right now, a new book dealing with the Kennedy assassination for Kansas. So please, Professor McKnight.
Thank you for coming, and I hope it's going to be worthwhile. I'll try to do the best I can. I want to begin this way. Actually, what I'm going to do is, in brief overview, is to try to give you a sense of Lee Harvey Oswald's last 45 hours on Earth, okay? Now, to begin with, I just want to begin this way, and that is to try to make as clear as I possibly can how quickly Oswald was put in the frame, okay? As the assassin of the president, the assassin of Officer Tippit, and the man who wounded Governor Connolly. Now, some of this would have been very interesting in some ways. So I don't have specific information, but we do have accounts, for example, of the Kennedy cabinet people who were, for example, on an airplane and were heading to Tokyo for a conference. Back in Washington, there were only 4 cabinet people left there. McNamara was one, Bobby Kennedy was another, and then there was the Gronsky and another fellow, minor figures. The rest of them were scattered across the world. Now those in the Air Force plane that was heading toward Tokyo for a conference, that included the Secretary of State, his assistant, Robert Manning, Pierre Salinger, Kennedy's press secretary, were in that plane. Accounts of these people tell us that while they were in that plane, what they don't tell us is the time, is that they were alerted to the fact that the president had been shot. Not only had he been shot, but they were also told that the one who shot him was Lee Harvey Oswald, who had been to the Soviet Union, and he had done this. Now, I wish lovely to know exactly what time that happened. The president, as you know, in terms of Central Standard Time, was killed, about 12:31. I think is when he was shot, 12:31, declared dead at about 1:10, something like that. Pierre Salinger, though, in writing his account, also contributed to the Kennedy Library a manuscript. And in that manuscript, he indicated the time on that plane they learned about this information. That manuscript is in Harvard. I went up there. It is missing. It is gone. Nobody knows where it is. Back in Washington, D.C., things happened rather quickly. At 3:40 Central Standard Time, Abram Chavez, State Department legal counsel, received a call from Acting Secretary of State George Ball with directions to gather, quote, together the files in the department on Oswald, on Lee Harvey Oswald. That was at 3:40 Central Standard Time. He then tasked Mr. Chavez to be sure that he had on his desk the next morning a report on what the State Department had on Lee Harvey Oswald. Now we get to the more specific indicators now of how fast this thing developed. At 12:45 Central Standard Time, 15 minutes after the shooting, a Dallas lieutenant inspector by the name of J.H. Sawyer, with 23 years in the department, was on the police radio with a description of the shooter. That is in the that source there is in the FBI Lee Harvey Oswald file. And the description came this way. He was a white male, approximately 30 years of age, slender built, 5'10" and about 165 pounds. Well, that wasn't Lee Harvey Oswald. And that he had a rifle, and that it looked like a 30-30 type Winchester, but no description on what he was wearing. My question would be, that's interesting. Because if you become that specific and then cannot describe what he's wearing, it suggests you didn't know what he was going to be wearing getting up that morning before the event occurred. That's an indication of something that would require, I think, clutching at this issue again and thinking it through. But we'll leave it go at that. But what is equally more interesting is that Sawyer, a 23-year veteran on the police force, never was able, the source gave him that. He said somebody came up and told him that. But he never got the source's name. 23 years in the Dallas Police Department, and he never got the source's name. Now, Oswald, at this particular time, was 24 years old. He weighed 131 pounds. And according to Dr. Rose, who did his autopsy, he was 5'9" in height. Okay, so when he died, when he was killed himself on Sunday, those were his vitals. He had no description like that on the top. Although there is, interestingly enough, there was a CIA file. They had several files on Oswald. One was called the Lee Henry Oswald file, and in that file, the dimensions you get for this fellow, for the Lee Harvey Oswald in this file, was that he was 165 pounds. He was about 30 years old, and he was about 5'10". That's sort of interesting. If anybody was asked me about that later, maybe I can explain that at a little bit more length. The first, I'm not sure of this, and I won't say it. I'd ask Dave Kaiser about it. Is, I think, some indication that maybe the first time the American people heard of Lee Harvey Oswald, his name, it may have been from Walter Cronkite, who was broadcasting at that time. But I may have to go back and wait till David Kaiser is able to nail that down. I don't know. In any event, So that is just simply an opening, setting up, I think, the spirit of the times. Now, what happened here next was it was absolutely important to find out that this description of the shooter that Sawyer got, that description of the shooter came from a physical source. And so while Sawyer could not satisfy us in terms of the name of the person who gave him this description, very quickly that name will surface. And it'll be the name of Mr. Brennan. He is the commission's star witness for placing Oswald in the frame for shooting JFK, Governor Connally. Even though, as I will go on a little bit more, even though the Warren Commission had no credible evidence ever that Brennan was ever able to pick Oswald out of a lineup, and I'll explain a little bit of that a little bit later as I move ahead here. Now, but even more specifically, and this is a document I don't think has been revealed yet, in terms of putting Oswald in the frame. Before any police had any forensic evidence against Oswald, at 1:40 on 11/22, Oswald was pronounced, JFK was pronounced dead about 30 minutes before this. An arrest report cited Oswald as the man, quote, the man who shot and killed President John F. Kennedy, police officer Tippit. He also shot and wounded Governor Connally. And if anybody wants to see this document, I have it up here. It's a 62-109-060. That's a main JFK file, 2074 evidence behind file, and here it is. And the date of this is the date of this police report is 1:40 p.m. Central Standard Time. That is 20 minutes after JFK was pronounced dead at Parkland Memorial Hospital. In 20 minutes, they've got Oswald, and they've got him in the frame already. That's wonderful. That's extraordinary police work. I'm not sure when Oswald was arrested in the Texas theater, but it wasn't. It may have been after this. I'm not sure. And I have to apologize for that. I have to go back and try to check that out. Well, as it occurred, since they needed an explanation for the identification of Oswald, that Sawyer then broadcast over the police radio, they needed a witness, and Howard Brennan becomes that witness. Now, the 2 points about Brennan, and I could spend a lot of time on Mr. Brennan. The 2 points. There is no firm evidence that Brennan ever was present at a lineup and picked Oswald out of the lineup. Brennan makes that claim in time. He will make that claim in a book that will be published 4 years after his death, that he in fact did pick Oswald out of a lineup on 11/22. But there is, and that's in a book that he had. It was published posthumously in a book called Eyewitness to History, is where he states that. But if you go through the laborious work of going through the documentation, the most dramatic rejection of that comes when Captain Fritz, we'll say a little bit more about Fritz in a minute, Captain Fritz, who was really sort of running the show down there, was questioned by Commissioner McCloy, John McCloy, of the Warren Commission, about was he there at the time of the lineup when Brennan actually pointed to Oswald as the man he allegedly saw in the 6th floor southeast corner window with a rifle and discharging that rifle at the President of the United States. And when confronted with that, Fritz could not answer McCloy. He said, "Well, I don't even remember if I was at that questioning." He just flubbed it away. It was so clear that he found himself in an embarrassing situation that McCloy dropped the questioning. Anybody who's interested, if you have the Warren Commission report, go to the fourth volume 4H, page 227, and check it out yourself. Brennan's testimony was worthless. It was staged, rehearsed, and was privately rejected by the FBI and the Warren Commission behind the scenes. Now, two important points I think would follow here. Number one is another man who appears on the scene on 11/22 is a fellow by the name of Charles Leslie Bronson. Bronson was an engineer. He was in Daly Plaza on 11/22. He was taking pictures of the presidential motorcade as it came off Houston and then turned onto Elm. And about a little bit, by 5 minutes maybe before Kennedy and the limousine turned onto Elm, he had a new camera, and he was panning in on what had been the area where he would get a picture of the motorcade. But this was a new camera, and so he was getting even more than that. He was getting the entire Texas School Book Depository building and the 6th floor. He had about 94 exposures of that 6th floor window, southeast corner. It is the only window that is open on the 6th floor. It is the alleged assassin's lair, where Oswald is waiting for the president. 94 exposures. He turned that information, those pictures, over to the FBI, if not the 22nd, the 23rd. The local FBI people looked at it and returned it back to him and reported his film did not even show the Texas School Book Depository. The word for that came from headquarters. Bury that film, which they did with dispatch. If you want a little bit more of that, it's in breach of trust. I have it in breach of trust. On December 1963, after Oswald was dead, this whole official solution to the crime was already now put together and resolved, quote unquote. A couple of FBI agents back in Washington, D.C. took a look at the Bronson film. And now that the political issue is now over, it's resolved, there's no problem with it. What they found out here, and this is a document, if you'd like to take a look at it, I'll just show it to you. They found that the corner window on the 6th floor of the Texas School Book Depository building, shown in Bronson film, showed no images that could be interpreted as individuals who were found in any of these exposures. The pictures do show an outline of what may be interpreted as boxes, and were later behind the window. Now, they didn't stop there. They took the Bronson films, and then they shuffled them off to the U.S. Navy Photographic Interpretation Center at Suitland, Maryland, which is probably one of the best in the world at that time. And the guys down there took a look at it and reported the same thing. There's nobody in that window, nobody in the sniper's window. They're just simply images of book boxes, which is what was up on the sixth floor. That, of course, is after the whole case has been closed. Did Oswald fire a weapon that day? Well, very quickly, I would just simply say this. Once again, I'm using FBI documents. In September of '64, the Warren report was finished. It may have not gone public yet, but it was finished. It was in the printer's hands. And sometime, I don't know if the date is terribly important here, but Rankin, who was the chief counsel for the Warren Commission, got a request. A request came from an individual, Stuart Wolpert, who was head of productions of some large movie company, and he was going to put out a movie, a documentary called 4 Days in November. And in doing that, he got to Rankin, and he said, could you run this manuscript past the FBI to make sure there are no errors in the manuscript? And Rankin got to Hoover, and Hoover said, no, he was reluctant, but he said, okay, go ahead. And so in examining the manuscript, went into the hands of Mr. Belmont, who really was running the investigation. I think you have to appreciate it this time. Hoover was right on the edge of retirement. He was taking afternoons off, napping, that kind of thing. He was not exactly on top of the evidence, but he was interested in terms of the political question here, and that is that Oswald did it, they caught him, and that's the end of the situation. So Belmont takes a look at the transcript. I'm sure he would rather have done other things, but since Hoover said go ahead and do it and get Rankin off my back. When it comes to the question here, the question that was raised about Oswald, there's a section in the film, in the transcript, about Oswald, being the shooter that day and having shot at the president. Belmont says this is FBI Belmont. He said, this is erroneous, as that these tests, the paraffin tests, were essentially negative, and our laboratory experts have so testified before the President's Commission. I don't know where that was. In addition, highly technical examinations made by the Atomic Energy Commission in our laboratory on the paraffin tests cannot connect Oswald with the rifle. Cannot connect Oswald with the rifle. Now that's FBI, okay? That's internal FBI situation here.
Give a minute more. So
okay. Well, a minute more, all I can say is this, is that Oswald, when he was in the hands of the police, he was interrogated, I think 8 times under interrogation on those 3 days. Lineups, all that sort of thing. Under those circumstances, there is not a record other than a record of those interrogations of what was said and what did Oswald respond to. Here is the crime of the century. And the individual who's held responsible for killing the president and the policeman, Mr. Tippit, and wounding Connolly, not a word. Except we do remember that at one time when he was brought through police headquarters, they said, "Did you kill the president?" He said, "No, I'm just a patsy. I'm just a patsy." So we have a situation here, and the Warren Commission had to ask, what kind of record did you keep of this exchange? And Captain Fritz, who was in charge of this, he said, we didn't have a tape recorder. The Dallas police, okay, they got 170 men on the force. We didn't have a tape recorder. He said, I put in requisitions twice, 2 years in a row for a tape recorder, and they denied them to me. And stenographic records, there was a stenographer there, but no stenographic records. Warren Commission found no problem with that at all. But what we do know here, and I have documentation, I'd be glad to show it to you, is that on 11/24, that's Sunday, Oswald is killed in the basement after warnings that there was going to be an attempt on his life. Warnings came early Sunday morning to the FBI, to the sheriff's office, and to the Dallas cops. He still, instead of moving him out in the evening, a warning came, and two people said to him, "We don't want to cause any problems. We're going to kill the son of a bitch, and so just, allow yourself to be reconciled to that fact." Now, all we ended up with then at that time were 2 sheets of paper written by Captain Fritz on these 7 or 8 interrogations. That's all that was left at the time of the assassination. And let me just end with this: as soon as Lee Harvey Oswald was murdered on Sunday, despite those warnings, I mean, the biggest Latin American country in the world, here he is, surrounded by all these cops, 170 news people. Jack Ruby comes in and bumps him off. As soon as that happened, the Secret Service grabbed a hold of Marina Oswald and her 2 children, and they took her to a safe spot where they then, after dinner, interrogated her. It's on tape for 7 hours. Now, was the Secret Service in on the interrogations? Of course. Did they have a tape recorder available? Of course. What has happened to all that information? It's all gone. All gone. We don't know about it at all. So anyway, those are some indication of Lee Harvey Oswald's last 44 hours on Earth. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor McKnight. Next up is David Kaiser, who has taught history at Harvard, Carnegie Mellon, the Naval War College, and Williams College, where he currently holds the Stanley Kaplan Visiting Professorship. He is the author of numerous articles and 6 books, including American Tragedy, Kennedy, Johnson, and the Origins of the Vietnam War, and The Road to Dallas, the Assassination of John F. Kennedy, which he's brought with us so we can see. And I'd like to call up David.
Thank you, Doug, and thank you, Jim, for the courageous act of putting together this panel. I'm going to start with a couple of brief remarks about the historiography of the case so I can let you know where I fit in. For the last nearly half century, the discussion of the assassination has been dominated by 2 schools of thought, or, if you will, 2 faiths. And I'm going to very briefly describe each of them and how they approach the evidence in the case. To begin with, there's the Church of the Lone Assassin, whose adherents insist that both Oswald and Ruby were essentially lone nuts who murdered John Kennedy and Lee Harvey Oswald, respectively, for their own personal reasons. And because they believe this, the adherents of this church respond to any evidence of conspiracy in the same way: it must be false. Now, in any complex case, and this is a very complex case, one can always find some reason to disbelieve any piece of evidence if that's what you want to do. And indeed, that is how trial lawyers make their living. And thus, members of the Church of the Lone Assassin always find some way to disregard any evidence of conspiracy. May I say that on one critical point, they are, in my opinion, correct. There is massive evidence that Lee Harvey Oswald did fire the shots that struck John Connally and President Kennedy, that he did kill Kennedy, and that he was the only actual killer, and that was clearly demonstrated in various ways by the House Select Committee on Assassinations in the late 1970s. But on why Oswald and Ruby did what they did, I part company with the Church of the Lone Assassin. Now, on the other hand, on the other side, we have the Church of the Grand Conspiracy. And their adherents are frequently rather vague about exactly what they think did happen and who was responsible, but they are absolutely convinced that there was a very large conspiracy, usually involving figures within the US government, and a massive cover-up. Many of them argue that Oswald was innocent, or at least that he may have been. And their approach to the evidence is just as simple. Any discrepancy in the evidence,